How does one follow up on catching lightning in a bottle? Especially when that lightning was the first successful step for modern superhero games, with its focus on implementing the ethos of the title character into every stitch of gameplay, perfectly balancing the scales of power between you, the player, and the world you feel trapped in. Arkham Asylum did so much right that was applauded by many, so we can only imagine how the team at Rocksteady felt about how to follow up on the 2009 hit. The easy route, which a lot of other studios would have done, would be to do it all again. Keep it all in another relatively small area, improve some specific design choices, keep the same exact tone that leans on horror and thriller elements, add a new gadget or two. Bing bang boom, you've got a game that most would probably still enjoy. But in all honesty, when something as special as Arkham Asylum comes out, to just do that again wouldn't hit the same. That moment has passed. To truly keep everyone's attention after catching lightning in a bottle, you have to do something different, something unexpected. So how do you truly follow up on catching lightning in a bottle? You open the bottle and see where the lightning goes next. Welcome to the second episode of the Arkham Files, a KindaFunny Games mini-series where I, Barrett Courtney, look back at what made each game in the Batman Arkham franchise so special. Today, let's talk about becoming fear in the game that truly evolved the series, Batman Arkham City. When I first played Arkham City back in high school, even with how obsessed with it I was, watching every possible trailer and reading every theory I could before release, I truly didn't know what to expect. That first playthrough blew my mind. Upon revisiting, the story does admittedly have some issues with pacing and focus, but there's just so many amazing moments in this game that I still think about all the time. The gradual expansion of this universe from Asylum to City really lets this series go even deeper into Batman's lore than it could in the first. With side missions that followed up on threads from Asylum or referencing some of my favorite stories from the comics, City really felt like Rocksteady pulling out all of the stops, which for me felt so impressive for a sequel that came out only 2 years later. Now, of course, City's more open nature didn't grab everyone, with a lot of people preferring Asylum's smaller scale world with heavy Metroidvania design. People who prefer Asylum usually talk about how City's more open world nature makes it a less unique experience. And while I can't deny that City is definitely a bigger game, I don't think it loses any uniqueness. I just think it's a different type of unique. I really enjoy how my friend Alex O'Neill puts it.
If Asylum was the Metroidvania of the series, then Arkham City is the Link to the Past. Each area has a dungeon, whether it's Joker's Steel Mill, Penguin's Museum, or Ra's al Ghul's Hidden City. You usually spend a little time in each dungeon, then acquire a new ability or gadget partway through that helps you get out of said dungeon. These specific domains help each villain have their own moment while also developing their own atmosphere, much like each Zelda dungeon typically correlates to its own element. All the while, those tools received from those same domains naturally translate to finding even more nooks and crannies when you return to the open city. Zelda is an open world, but you don't think of it as an open world game because of the condensed nature of specific areas, either for dungeons or crannies alike.
And I believe that's why I never understood why people point at Arkham City being an open world as a negative. Yes, it's bigger than Asylum, but the heavy attention to detail and design in each segmented area never made it feel like a generic Ubisoft game that spreads itself way too thin. Rocksteady evolved the series in what it needed to be, except for maybe all of those Riddler trophies. In the last decade, the term "it makes you feel like" has been used a lot when talking about games. And while a lot of us in the industry get teased whenever we say this, we do have to remember that is the goal for a lot of video games today, to truly put you in the shoes of the character that you're playing as. And to this day, I think Arkham City still does it the best. Now, on the surface level, that can be pretty obvious with things I mentioned before, like the improved flow of combat and having more gadgets at your disposal. There seemed to be this desire from the developers to flip the design philosophy from Asylum. I talked about in my Asylum video about how almost everything on a design level was made to make the player feel a lack of control, and in doing that, kept them in a feeling of unease. Batman wasn't fully prepared for that night. But in Arkham City, from the jump, it feels like the complete opposite. Rocksteady has even said in interviews how they wanted players to have full access to all of the gadgets from Asylum at the very beginning of the game to make the player feel like Batman has been preparing for this night. While how he got into Arkham City wasn't exactly as he planned, Batman was ready. With that simple decision on a gameplay level, the player can feel that power dynamic shift in their favor. But also with the bigger environment this time around and how the story is set up, the game subtly instills more of a feeling of Batman at his full potential. Almost every event that happened in Arkham Asylum was, for the most part, by Joker's design. Enemies were on full alert and expecting you, so they were all working together because they all knew that they were part of your only goal, which was to stop the Joker. So while you did feel like Batman to an extent, there was a feeling of restriction. Whereas in Arkham City, the game covers several districts of Gotham with multiple enemy factions fighting for power in this messed up prison experiment. These two elements give Batman the upper hand by actually having the element of surprise. And while things feel easier for Batman this time around, with enemies either not expecting to even see Batman that night or being distracted by this gang war going on, it gives the player almost an endless ceiling on how to best strike fear into the heart of the enemy. Criminals are a superstitious and cowardly lot. Here are endless tools to take advantage of that.
You are no longer stuck in the asylum with them. They are stuck in this city with you.
It's because of this power shift to make you truly feel like Batman that makes the Mr. Freeze fight stand out so much. It shifts back into the design philosophy of Asylum because it's a fight Batman wasn't fully prepared for. While it's a familiar terrain, Freeze has truly made it his own, taking the feeling of control away from you.
People could use this as an example to argue that Arkham Asylum's design philosophy is better, but I would argue that Freeze's fight stands out so much because it goes against the grain of the rest of the game. Getting the player to feel comfortable for most of the game, only to take it away for such a formidable foe, is honestly a stroke of genius, and it's why I think it's still the best boss fight in the series. But back to my overall point about why this game is the best at making you feel like the character you're playing as, and it can honestly be summed up in the first 15 minutes of the game.
Bruce Wayne gets arrested and thrown into Arkham City. The first time the player is given actual control is when Bruce is tied to a chair, which I believe is a visual metaphor for the gameplay. They want you to feel constricted. You get thrown into the prison with absolutely nothing but your good looks, and you have to fight some penguin goons while still handcuffed. Then you break free of this visual constriction, and just moments later, you break free of your gameplay constriction.
Up until this moment in the Arkham games, you felt constrained. But then there's that moment of release.
You put on the cowl and glide off a building to either save Catwoman from Two-Face, or you can save Jack Ryder from some unsuspecting goons. Either way, your first fight in this game is going to scare the crap out of someone. The gloves are off this time around.
You are Batman. They know it, and because of that, you actually feel it.
So where do you go after City? Like I said at the beginning of this video, most companies would just try to do the same thing over again.
And with that comes the rise of WB Games Montreal, who had to find their place in a world that they did not create. Join me on the next episode of the Arkham Files as we'll dive into Arkham Origins to talk about how WB Montreal nailed the origin of the Dark Knight. And until next time,
lights out, Rich Boy.